We talk endlessly about boomers. We analyze millennials like they're a cultural emergency. We debate Gen Z like the future of civilization depends on cracking their code. But there's this entire generation sitting in the middle of all of it, quietly competent, almost invisible, and absolutely unbothered by the fact that nobody's talking about them. Generation X. Born roughly between 1965 and 1980. Your older coworker who never panics during a crisis. Your parent who seems oddly self-contained, like they processed something a long time ago and just kept going. The person who built the internet but doesn't post about their lunch. And here's what nobody tells you about them. They didn't become that way by accident. Something happened to this generation, something specific, something measurable, that forged them into the most psychologically resilient people in any room. And once you understand what it was, you'll never look at them the same way again. And no, this isn't nostalgia. It's not some generational superiority contest. And it's definitely not the usual kids these days have it too easy speech. What Gen X developed was something far more specific than toughness. It was a psychological architecture, built under pressure, refined through repeated disappointment, and quietly carried into every job, every relationship, every decision they've made since. And once you see the blueprint, you understand why this generation doesn't ask for help, doesn't perform their struggles, and doesn't break when the rug gets pulled out. Because it already happened. More than once. And they built something around it. And here is what nobody ever told you about why they turned out this way. Psychology has a name for the environment that made them. Researchers call it a high contingency environment. A world where actions and outcomes were directly linked, no buffer time, no second chances, no adult to soften the consequences. A 1986 study published in the American Journal of Orthopsychiatry found that by 1984, approximately 7 million children between the ages of 5 and 13 were regularly unsupervised after school. 7 million children coming home to empty houses. And what that does to a developing brain, according to the research, is wire it for consequence prediction. When there's no adult to run to, your nervous system learns to model outcomes in real time. You think 3 steps ahead not because you're strategic, but because you had to be. It's 1977. You're 9 years old, and you come home to an empty house. Both your parents are working. No smartphone. No Ring camera. No way for anyone to know if you made it home safely. You let yourself in with the key on the string around your neck, make yourself a snack, do your homework alone, and wait. This wasn't a crisis. This was Tuesday. And Tuesday, repeated enough times, rewires you. You stop expecting rescue. You stop expecting someone to check on you. You start solving problems before they become problems because you've learned at a cellular level that waiting for help is a losing strategy. This is what psychologists mean when they talk about self-efficacy forged under pressure, not confidence built by encouragement, but confidence built by evidence. The evidence that you handled it yesterday, so you'll handle it today. It's 1982. You're watching your father come home from the company he gave 20 years to, carrying a box. They told him work hard, follow the rules, and you'll be taken care of. Then corporate restructuring happened and the rules changed overnight. Gen X watched this happen, not once but repeatedly. The divorce rate doubled through the 70s and 80s. The savings and loan crisis. The downsizing epidemic. Adults telling them one thing while doing another. Psychologists call the resulting mindset defensive pessimism. Not cynicism exactly, but a calculated refusal to stake your emotional well-being on systems that have already proven unreliable. You cross your fingers for the best, but you've already prepared for the worst. Not because you're negative, because you're paying attention. It's 1985. You're in a classroom and a teacher is explaining what to do if a nuclear bomb drops. Duck and cover, she says. Get under your desk. You're 12 years old, and you already know this is absurd. But you write it down anyway, because that's what you do when adults ask you to hold 2 completely contradictory ideas at once. Everything is fine, and everything could end tomorrow. This is where the irony came from. Not as a personality quirk, as a survival mechanism. When the world is genuinely absurd and you're not allowed to say so directly, you learn to laugh at it from a safe distance. You crack the joke before the situation can hurt you. You keep things at arm's length. You maintain just enough detachment to function. Research on emotional regulation under chronic uncertainty describes this as cognitive distancing, a protective buffer between the stimulus and the emotional response. Gen X didn't choose to be ironically detached. They got there the hard way. They watched their parents' generation get destroyed by corporate loyalty. So they made a different calculation. They couldn't control whether they'd get laid off. They couldn't control whether the company would survive. They couldn't control the economy or the housing market or who was in the White House. But they could control one thing: whether they were the most capable person in the room when everything else fell apart. This is why Gen X doesn't post about their work. They don't need to. The work is the point, not the visibility, not the recognition. The Journal of Adult Development published research showing Gen X reports significantly lower need for external validation in professional contexts compared to adjacent generations, not because they don't care about quality, but because they stopped tying their self-worth to other people's assessment of it somewhere around 1988. But here is the part nobody talks about. There is a difference between self-reliance as a strength and self-reliance as a wall you built so high that nobody can get in anymore. The same wiring that makes Gen X handle every crisis without flinching is the same wiring that makes asking for help feel like a confession of failure. Research from the Journal of Adult Development confirms it. Gen Xers report significantly lower rates of seeking social support during high-stress periods. Not because they don't have people who would show up for them, but because needing someone feels at a gut level like losing. So the mirror question is this: is the independence you carry a choice, or is it just the only mode you ever learned? Go back to that 9-year-old with the key around their neck. The one who came home to an empty house and figured it out anyway. That child wasn't born resilient. They became resilient because there was no other available option. The mechanism that made them invisible, that taught them not to need, not to ask, not to rely, was a protection system built in real time by a child under real pressure. And now it's running in the background of every adult decision they make. Quietly, efficiently, almost without their noticing. It's not a wound anymore. It's a design. Here's what I want you to sit with for a moment. We live in a world that has become obsessed with being seen, with documenting every achievement, every struggle, every ordinary Tuesday afternoon. And in the middle of all of that noise, there is a generation that built the infrastructure the rest of us perform on, and then quietly stepped back. They didn't ask for credit. They didn't document the work. They didn't wait for anyone to notice. They are the bridge generation. And bridges don't ask to be appreciated. They just hold. Through every storm, every load, every generation that crosses without looking down, they just hold. You are not the generation that got overlooked. You are the generation that made yourself unforgettable to every single person who actually needed you, and never once required an audience for it. That's not a gap in your story. That's the whole story. If this hits something in you, the next video goes even deeper into the psychology of people who learn to disappear under pressure, why they go quiet instead of asking for help, and what neuroscience now says about the long-term cost of carrying everything alone. If you want to keep understanding the architecture behind the way you're wired, subscribe. There are people here who think the way you think. And we're just getting started. I'll see you in the next one.